I'm an old infantryman no longer serving in the Army. I've always enjoyed reading. Unlike other soldiers during my service time, I owned neither a car nor a TV, and because I lacked either a car or a TV, I would often spend my downtime reading a book purchased at the local PX. It goes without saying that the nonfiction books on offer at the PX and the uniform clothing and sales were military and management themed. Some such books are written by former soldiers, others written by pure scholars, and some still written by business types. After a number of years in uniform, my Amazon purchasing habits begin to mirror the shelves down at the PX. My thoughts on a particular author's take on the military or the management or the history are offered in this video. These reviews are offered in the spirit of getting straight to the point, or in the words of a wise man, I am breaking it down super jumbo Crayola style. The only apology I will make is for not being critical enough. Conscientious objections and other good ideas have no place in the military. Such brittle ideas break quickly with the constant flexing of a military at work. Whatever you do, don't take my word for it. Ask your friend who's currently serving. Today, I am reviewing The Battle That Stopped Rome by Peter S. Wells. Here are the details of the edition I am reviewing. This book provides a perfect example of an academic with no genuine interest in the military per se writing a military history. It's a sort of book that infuriates me, a former infantryman, to no end. How can anyone make an informed judgment about an ancient army when they have no interest in the modern army? How can an academic judge the remaining evidence, both archaeological and literary and epigraphic, without understanding why armies do certain things that they do? How can an intelligent and comfortable author that oozes common sense pragmatically apply logic to a proscriptive world that is often capricious, illogical, and sometimes dangerous? We had an expression during my time in the Army. There is common sense, and then there's Army common sense. The Army often following a course of action that is inexplicable to just about anyone except a fellow soldier. Wells clearly lacks any appreciation for the occasional odd and whimsical appearing nature of Army life. With this in mind, I want to make clear I have no archaeological training, and I'm assuming the empirically based archaeological observation in this book are correct. I'm taking issues with Wells' misapplication of the established archaeological facts. In short, The Battle That Stopped Rome is an informative book marred by a historian's total lack of consideration for either the common soldier or the military decision-making logic informing the general who commanded them. As far as I or any soldier, past, present, or future, is concerned, there is no excuse for walking troops into a known ambush, let alone one so patently obvious as the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. I understand that Wells is an anthropologist and not a soldier. However, this cannot be an excuse for such a patent disregard for the on-the-ground military situation. Sure, we don't know everything about the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, but we know enough, as this book itself provides the facts to place the blame squarely on Varus. The specific conclusion I cannot accept is this. The reason for the Roman disaster in the Teutoburg Forest lay not in Varus's lack of ability or his misjudgment, but instead in a much more pervasive misunderstanding of the political and social situation there on the part of Augustus and his advisors. It's in the final paragraph of page 86. I read that and I hear something to the effect of, the reason for the American disaster in the Vietnam jungle lay not in General Westmoreland's lack of ability or his misjudgment, but instead in a much more pervasive misunderstanding of the political and social situation there on the part of Kennedy and his advisors. I suspect that anthropologist or not, Harvard or not, Dr. Wells would not accept my rewording of his statement. For those same reasons, I cannot accept his apologetic thesis regarding Varus. To agree with either is to ignore the military in general and the generals in specific. Later in the book, Wells draws another conclusion with straw. Wells claims Arminius recognized that the Germanic tribal warriors could not successfully challenge the Roman legions on an open field of battle. Instead, they had to rely on their special knowledge of the landscape and on their greater maneuverability. I'm going to stop right here and point out that Wells has just used two very different and opposing military ideas in the same sentence. To, quote, rely on special knowledge of the landscape is to wait in place or otherwise operate within a well-covered position, safe from Roman counterattack. By definition, this tactic relies on either favorable terrain or fortifications. The very idea of a, quote, greater maneuverability is completely at odds with the original notion that the terrain of battle was itself unsuitable to maneuver. Presumably, if there was any room for maneuver on the Calcrisa battlefield, then the Romans surely would have been able to make use of that freedom allowed by the terrain. However, Wells, like all comfortable military shunning academics, is oblivious to the military contradictions in his claims. Wells goes on to repeat this claim and embellish it further. To quote the start of his chapter on the battle, typically, lighter-armed native warriors with superior knowledge of the landscape and greater maneuverability can defeat heavily armed imperial armies in places where those armies are unable to take advantage of their technological superiority. This is clearly a concept I'll have to cover in greater detail elsewhere. Suffice it to say that Wells is confusing the separate and very different concepts of mobility and mobilization. The archaeological evidence that Wells presents, the building of a fortification wall on the side of Calcrissa's hill, clearly suggests that the, quote, maneuverability was not the winning strategy on the battlefield. Arminius himself making artful use of Roman-style camp engineering and soldier fatigue works. Couple these limited siege works with Arminius's political intrigues, and we have a sort of a Wild West showdown writ large. Wells also lapses into what I call Victor Davis Hansenism. That is to say, he prefers his imagination over his evidence. And secretly, Peter Wells, just like Victor Davis Hansen, is a conscientious objector with no true measure of how soldiers feel or don't feel. Yet this plain fact doesn't stop Wells from lecturing us soldier types how we should really feel if we get marched into a dicey situation. To quote at length, no Roman from Italy felt completely comfortable in the dark and wild landscapes of northern Europe, and memories of the close call suffered by Drusus' legions still lingered among some of the troops. Frequently during their campaigns, soldiers swore oaths of devotion to the deities who protected them. Most wore amulets, bronze pins, pendants, and other decorations on their uniforms to shield them from the malevolent local spirits. The presence of the governor Varus was important to the soldiers' morale, knowing that the supreme Roman authority in this part of the empire's frontier rode with them provided some sense of security. What utter and complete bull. This passage is constructed from whole cloth, as they say. Wells has no basis for any of this flight of fancy. If nothing else, it shows how contemptuously he holds the common soldier if he thinks that a leader such as Varus would inspire confidence in either his soldiers or his centurions. The fact is, we don't know what the Roman legionaries and centurions said about Varus behind his back. I know from experience that poor military leaders do not inspire morale. Quite the opposite, in matter of fact. And in my own reading, the evidence Varus comes out as a general for the peace and not a general for the war. It's not like Varus raised his own legions or anything like that. This book's apology for the very civilian character of Varus and his very peace, love, and flowers decision to walk into a long-planned ambush can only be the conclusion of a conscientious objector. Someone who is clearly uncomfortable with what the military does and what the military is asked to do. Varus must have thought he was on parade, and any of the most basic military decision-making processes might have prevented or mitigated the eventual outcome. Yet, unlike Wells, I blame Varus totally and in full, and not Augustus. Aside from disagreeing strongly with the conscientious objector's thesis, in the book, the reporting on the archaeology of the battlefield at Calcrisa does redeem the book somewhat. These archaeological facts arm those of a military mind with a good idea of the terrain surrounding the battle, and thus allow us to form our own opinions about one of the original battles in recorded history. A battle that should never have happened, something the Romans understood even in their own time. Here are my recommendations. Keep well in mind that the book was written by someone who doesn't even realize that they are a conscientious objector. Still, the book gets 2 stars out of 5 stars. Much like Varus, despite the 2 stars, this book is still a go. A shorter version of this review is posted on Amazon. That's all we have time for today. This has been an independent production for YouTube by Goblin, February 2022. All rights reserved. I hope this was useful.